Hey, there you are. Come on in. Let's go talk about pocket knives. So I have this Primble Barlow that I bought in rough shape here. Looks good at first. There, a pen blade, has great snap, works well. Both blades are relatively centered in the blade well. Main blade snaps open good to the half stop. Open it the rest of the way. And you have blade wobble, and my spring is sunk in very deeply. Again, at the half stop, it looks a little more normal. When it's closed, my spring is even. So, not sure what can cause that other than a piece of the blade being broken off or something. But it sounds crazy. I don't know what the problem is. We're going to open it up and see if we can find out. I'm using the razor blade to cut the pins on this knife, but I'm using a different vise. This is an old used vise my dad picked up, fastened to a different work table. I thought I would try it out, but it's not working well for me at all. This vise is smaller. It's very worn. The jaws are not secure to the base, so the entire thing moves. And then the way the jaws are on it, I'm having to hold the knife at an angle as I do this. So I managed to cut through the pins, but it becomes much more of an ordeal than I wanted it to be. So I think we're going to go back to using the other vise. This one, I even broke one of the handles, which these plastic handles were uninspiring anyway, probably need to be replaced, but that was not what I had intended to do with this knife. But I guess we're committed to that now. So here we go. Just a side note: make sure you have a good vise when you're using this technique, and preferably one that is a bit larger than this as well. I had not cut all the way through that rear pin using the razor blade technique, but since that handle popped off, I can just clip it with my side cutters and go on. I did have a little bit of trouble getting it apart, but nothing to worry about. Now I'll begin laying out each of the pieces and parts of the knife in order. I'll go ahead and mark my springs so I know which spring is which. Lay out all the liners, everything in order, and begin studying the knife and see if we can find out what's causing this main blade to act so weird. As you see here, I'm working that main blade, watching it, trying to see how the spring interacts with it. I can't tell much about it, so we'll go ahead and take that off and just inspect each of the pieces individually. Now you can see as I compare these two blades, the shape on the back of the tang is slightly different. The main blade, it's curved inward more. It's not a good flat straight edge, so I think that's got to be part of our problem. I've decided to go ahead and remove the pins that I've cut and start cleaning up these parts. There's a little bit of rust on the springs, the tangs of the blades, and I can do a better inspection once all of this is cleaned and this step is done and out of the way. Here's a technique I learned from new knife makers who are trying to create a spring to fit a knife, and it's called checking the spring load. So what we're doing is I'm nailing the liner to a board and make sure I have pins or nails in place for where each of the pins would be in the knife. And we can really work with it and check and see how the spring of the knife interacts with the tang of the blade. Very simple technique, but you get to kind of see an x-ray view of the inside of the knife and see how these things are going to work. And you can swap out parts. I can try and see if my problem is with the spring. I can put another spring in there. I can put the other blade in there and really study how these parts interact. You can see in this super close up how the spring is in line with the liner. Now as I open it, first the spring pops over beside the blade instead of up against it, but we'll kind of hold that in place and try this again. Now with this blade open, the spring is sunken deeply in, just like we saw before we took the knife apart. The spring does not appear to be misshapen, so I believe the problem has to be with the blade, but I'll verify this by trying the other spring just to be sure. And here we see that the blade sits a little bit proud when fully closed. So our spring and blade definitely are not matching up correctly. I'll take another close-up look at this tang, and you can see it has a very rough edge as well as being misshapen. I believe it had a flaw from the factory and a piece of it broke off afterward and fell out. I try to solder in a thin piece of metal onto the back side of the tang the way I normally do on the end of a tang when it's worn out, but this is far too thin to work. So now I'm going to remove that little piece of metal that I soldered in there, and we will solder in a larger piece of metal. I'm using a spring, a broken spring that came off a knife, and it's a good deal thicker. I will have to file it down or sand it down to the correct thickness. So what we're going to do at first is just solder this in there, kind of overcompensate if you would, or overcorrect for it, and then I can grind it down to the exact thickness that I need. So I'm going to coat the metal in flux because that helps the solder to stick to it. The metal doesn't get the oxidized layer when you heat it up because the flux helps protect that. Then I'm going to tin both pieces. Now what tinning does is where you put a small layer of solder on both pieces of metal, or a little bit on each piece of metal. Then you put the two together, heat it again, and it tends to bond very well. Now it's not the only way to solder metal together. You can put both pieces together and insert the solder. But if you don't have 3 or 4 hands to hold all these pieces at once, tinning definitely makes it easier. So we can watch and you'll see that this does work pretty well. especially if you don't solder every day. But this technique makes it a lot easier to do. Now that the two pieces are soldered together, I'll use a Dremel cut-off wheel, cut the excess spring off of it. Now you see I keep dipping it in water. I don't want to heat it up enough with the cutting wheel to melt the solder again. I want this to stay on there. Again, this has built it up much higher than it needs to be. And since that was already sloped at the wrong angle, my repair is also sloped at the wrong angle. That's one reason to put a little too much metal so I can grind it off, not just to make it thinner, but to get the correct angle on that back side of the tang. Okay, before I can reshape this, we've got to get everything even. The spring sticks out a little bit on the end, and the spring is thicker than the blade itself. So first I'm going to sand this down on the end so that it's even with that flat spot where on the very bottom of the tang, where the half stop is. Then I will take the sides of the spring and sand that down until it's the same thickness as the blade. It's not sticking out on either side. After that, I'll be able to put it on my board and check the spring load, try to mark it, and get it at the right angle and take the correct amount off. Now I'll move this blade back over to the board, check the spring load. Now, of course, it's going to have a lot of extra pressure on it, so my hands are kind of in the way. I'm trying to hold everything into place and keep them from popping loose. But once I get it open, you can see that this tang is built up way too far, and the spring is interfacing it at the wrong angle. We knew it would be. That's why we put something this thick on there, so now we can work it down to the correct thickness. I'm going to use a magic marker, and I'll just mark off, kind of doing this by eye. This is not exact, but not that difficult to do, about how much and at what angle I want to take off metal. Take it over to the sander. We'll just touch it to it briefly, take a little bit of metal off, put it on, try it again. I do this 3 or 4 different times until I get it pretty close. Then I'll move to a finer grit sanding belt and try to get it as exact as I can. All right, so now we've taken it down about as far as I felt comfortable doing. We'll open it up and test it out. And yeah, looks like we've got it. Fairly good matchup at the back. The spring's not sticking out too far, maybe a little, but not much. Good half stop still. The blade closes well, still peaking a little bit, but not as bad as before. So I think we'll begin taking the parts off the board and assemble this knife. So I decided to do a test fit assembly first before I actually assemble the knife for good. So I'm using drill bits for pins and things, just kind of whatever I have laying around. They may not be an exact fit, but it gives me a better idea of how it's going to look. I want to see how far my blade comes back, see what it really feels like, because there is a little bit of difference between using that board and actually having the parts in the knife. Testing the spring load on the board gets you very close, but I want to get a good feel for it before I try to assemble this knife, make sure I've got everything working properly. Wow, if only every center pin went in that easily by hand. But now that we got it in a test fit assembly, we'll check it out. The blades have a good closing snap, good opening snap. Again, I started to test the side-to-side wobble, but I don't have it peened, so that's not going to be right. But my blades are centered. The little blade, of course, is working just as it should. It has been all along. The main blade, when I have it open, my spring still sits a little bit proud. That means I need to take just a little bit more off the back of that tang, but the angle appears to be right. Everything feels good, interfaces well. We'll just take a little more off, and then I think we'll be ready to move forward to this. We're picking out some bone handles now from some bone that I tried to dye myself. I picked them up at a pet supply store. This was just for dog chews. But I sawed them up into slabs, tried to dye them. My dye did not penetrate well, but that's just one of those things. There's a lot of science that goes into dyeing bone, and I even tried a vacuum chamber, but it just did not take the dye very well. But we got these pieces. I think they still look good enough to try to use. So I'm going to compare them, see whether which one I want to go on Mark's side, which one Pyle's side. This second piece of bone is my favorite. I think I'll put it on the Mark side. The dark stripe you see in the middle of it was the inside curvature of the bone, and when you leave that on handles, that's called a soup bone look. Even though it's just the same bone, but you get a little bit of that inside groove, and it looks pretty nice on them. So we'll get those on. I'll put that on my Mark side. I'm just going to rough it in with a pencil so I can rough cut it, and I will put the M for the Mark side. Yeah, when I verified that, made sure that was the Mark handle. And then this one is going to look about the same either way I turn it, but I think it's just going to fit better if I turn the bone this way. So I will draw it in for my rough cut, and I will mark it with a P for the Pyle side, so I don't get them mixed up later and get the pieces reversed to how I originally wanted them. I've chosen epoxy to fasten these handles on with. It doesn't seem to make much difference in how it adheres. The Gorilla brand adhesives both do very well, but I'm in a little more of a hurry on this knife. I don't want to wait a day or two for the glue to cure, and the epoxy just cures much faster. So we'll put a stripe of that down. Go ahead and get one of my craft sticks and mix that up very well. You can see it a little better from this angle. And we'll get those glued in place. This is pretty much standard fare for any of you that's watched my channel. I don't do anything different on this one. Again, I had not originally intended to replace these handles, but since I broke one of the originals, we're going to put these bone slabs on there and see how the end result looks. And the process is the same for the second handle, so we'll just speed it up so you can get through it a little more quickly here. Some of these videos drag on. I feel like a little too long. If y'all disagree with me, let me know in the comments. I'll be glad to slow things down, but I feel like you're not really gaining much from watching me do two handles in low speed when you've already seen one. Now that the glue's cured good, I'll do some rough sanding on a 220 grit sanding belt, or rough contouring. Again, I don't get it quite down to the liner, I just get it close, and we will finish everything up and get all the parts good and smooth once the knife is together. Now this is closer to what I see from my point of view. It's not exact, or else I guess my head would be in the way of the camera, or the camera would be in the way of my eye, one of the two. But it's just pretty close to what I see. Now I've sped this up again for the same reason as before, but you can see how we just try to roll that and get things smooth. Get it pretty close, and again, that's my mark side handle. Now I'm going to begin the process of hafting it, bringing that bone down close to the same height as the bolster itself. And again, this is a 220 grit sanding belt, so this is kind of a rough version. I'm not going to get it exact with this. I'm removing more material, but it's very easy to remove too much material or get the slab down into the bolster itself and put some deep scratches on that bolster. But got that one pretty much done. We moved on to the second handle and do the same thing there. Now it's time to drill these handles for the pins. Now we have two holes we have to drill for pins. That is the center pin, which you see me drilling out right now, and then the one on the end, because those are the ones that go all the way through the knife. They have to be placed in exactly that spot, so the pin will go through the springs, the liners, and everything. Typically the manufacturer would have an additional pin just to hold the handle on. I'm not going to put it on these. Of course, we've glued the handles on where the manufacturer normally pins them on, because pinning is faster and a little more secure than glue alone. But you know, these two pins are going to help hold the handle on there. It doesn't absolutely have to have that other one. And I just think it would be difficult to pin that in that suit bone. I could probably do it, but I don't want to risk it. All right, I've got all my parts laid out, and we're going to assemble this knife for real this time. So I've got the correct pins. I've already done a test fit on those to make sure they are the right size, because it's easy to get that wrong. And then we'll just begin assembling the knife. I'm starting, of course, with the mark side handle. I've already cleaned up my parts. I did that off camera. Put my initials on one liner. I just forgot to film some of that, so but you've seen me do that many times. There's nothing different about it on this knife, except I assemble this one with a little less fumbling than what I normally do. When I assemble a knife just to assemble it myself, when I'm not filming, you know, I do things out of order. I'm just holding it in my hands. I don't have all the parts laid out straight like I do for the camera. But when I'm doing it to film it, I try to lay everything out and let you see what I'm doing. And it's a little more difficult on me, and sometimes I will do 3 or 4 takes on just assembling a knife, whereas the rest of the work, you know, I pretty much go through and just film it all in one take, and you see it as it goes. But it's so easy to fumble around, drop pins, get things that don't line up, and you have to back up and do it again when you're assembling a knife. It seems like that's the most awkward part of this. It's not the most difficult, but it's the most awkward to make it look nice and flawless. But here we'll get that in. We'll compress those back springs, and here we go. Put that pin in. I can't push it in by hand this time, so we'll give it a little nudge with the pliers, and in it goes. Since everything fit this well, we'll go ahead and pin it together. Again, I filed these pins because if you have the rough cut on the pin, it tends to be oddly shapen when you pin it in place. Now on this one, I probably wouldn't matter so much, but it's just a good habit to get into. Now I will go ahead and tell you about a mistake that I didn't discover at this point in the knife. These bolsters are not nickel silver, they're steel. So once I get that pin in place, I used a silver nickel pin. It shows up a little more than I like for them to. It doesn't hurt the knife in any way, but it's just one of those things that bother me. I should have used a nail, which would be a soft steel, a little stronger than the silver nickel, but would have worked well. Now here you see me using that 7/1000 inch feeler gauge as a slackener. Once we get that pinned in place, that helps me to get the right amount of tension on those blades, not pin it too tight. I tell you, it's a very sinking feeling when you pin one too tightly, and then the blades won't move. You can't open or close them, and you have to take the knife apart again, risk damaging it just to get that pivot pin out. So ask me how I know that. My blade is still a little bit loose, so I'll give it a few more gentle taps. I'm being very, very gentle with that, and we'll tighten it up just enough that the blade now has good movement and it's not too loose. The small blade, though, is a little off center. It's got the right amount of tension on it, but it is sitting off center. So we'll deal with that once we get these other pins pinned in place. This pin here on the back, you'll see, is right in the middle of that soup bone curve, and it's difficult to file, difficult to pin. Your hammer or the file or anything wants to hit the bone around it since it's in that little concave indentation. So we have to be very careful with that. Yeah, we'll pin it out and then drive it down in there a little further, and then we'll do the other side flush. And now I just realized my second challenge at pinning a pin with the concave bone. I have no way to put the other end of the pin against the anvil. So I will lay that piece of broken spring there right against the pin and pin against it, because when you're pinning on one end of the pin, the other pin has to be held up secure. Otherwise, all you're doing is just pushing it down. And I would have a long piece of pin sticking out the other side. So it did push it down a little bit, so I'll flip it over, pin it some more, as much as I can in that soup bone indentation. And now we'll put the spring up there and pin it some more till I'm satisfied that both sides are flared properly. Not just enough to hold the knife together, but also to have the nice look that I want with that. And make sure everything's sandwiched in there tightly. So we'll do the same thing here on the center pin. It's not right in the center of that dip, it's up a little higher, so it's a little bit easier, but we still have the same challenges when it comes to pinning it. Hey, forget the file. I found an easier way to get down in there and clean up that pin. My smaller blade is off-center enough that occasionally when closing it hits the liner, so it's a significant amount. You can take a screwdriver and try to pry between the blade and the bolster, so you're not prying on the liners themselves, or you'll just very quickly bend the liners and break the handles. But it didn't make any difference in this case. So the second technique that I use is to take another knife blade, and we'll use it to try to move this blade over. Now, there is a technique called crinking that involves hammering on the blade, but you also tend to break blades with that, so I don't want to run that risk. So here you'll see me insert another knife blade in between the liner and the blade on this one. I know my fingers are in the way, but I force that small blade closed, and you're trying to bend the pin enough to move that blade over just slightly, or sometimes it will bend the handles outward without excess pressure, and here it seems to work pretty well. Now we'll do our final contour sanding. I'm using a 220 grit belt here, where normally I use a 400, but this belt is older and worn, and it's taking off the right amount of material without leaving too rough a contour or too rough an edge. So what we're doing in the final contouring, you probably already know this, we're just getting everything smooth and even. The bone handles are sticking out a little bit beyond the liners and the springs, and we're just going to take a little layer of the bone, sometimes even the spring and the liner, until everything is good, smooth, and flat on the back. Bone and liners on the front, everything's smooth and even, and we don't have anything sticking out beyond the others. Then I will kind of knock the corners off that bone handle, if you would, just to make it fit the hand a little better. You don't want to leave sharp corners on the bone after you flatten it. So you'll see me come back and do that. And then we'll work a little bit on the hafting. I had that roughed in before, but we'll just finish that up on this sander, get those transitions good and smooth between the bone and the bolsters. And I'm a lot happier with the knife after that. It really does give it a much better look. Now I'll smooth those bolster pins just a bit on the sander. Again, you want to be very careful with those because these bolsters do have the word Barlow imprinted into them. I don't want to sand it enough to mess up any of that. So we're just going to very lightly roll it against the sander. I probably should have switched to a 400 grit, but we managed to do okay on this one without ruining them. Now I'll carry the knife across the room to the polisher, and we will shine this thing up and see how it looks. Sometimes in this step you will find flaws that you missed in sanding, things you just can't see until you try to put that final polish on it. You'll have to go back and do a little touch-up sanding, but I think in this instance everything worked out pretty well. We just polished it up and it was ready to go. All right, it's a little windy. I don't know if you can hear me, but I've stepped out in the sun to let you see this Primble, see how it turned out. I am pleased with it. It has its flaws, and of course I have to point those out, not because I'm not proud of my work, but because I want to do better. I want to learn from every mistake I make. The pen did not disappear. Everything's smooth. It looks good. It's just a different colored metal. When I double checked, these bolsters are steel rather than silvered nickel. I used a silvered nickel pen, thinking it was silvered nickel handles. They were very clean. They looked nice. They weren't rusty or anything, so I didn't even think of them being steel, but they are. And I should have used a nail to peen this with, and it would have come out a lot better. The soup bone handle looks nice. I had been not really concerned, but wondering how it would look, because I found out my die did not penetrate very deeply into the bone. So I tried to leave as much of the bark, I'll call it, as possible, the dyed part, because underneath it took a little dye, so it's sort of a rose color, almost pink, but it's not just natural bone, but it still looks good. Small blade, good walk and talk, I like it. The large blade has good opening snap and good closing snap. Of course, both blades have half stops, but at the half stop, the large blade feels loose and wobbly. Not extremely so, but I can move it a little bit. Fully open, it's fine. Fully closed, it's fine. But halfway in between at the half stop, it's just got a little wiggle and wobble to it. It'll never be perfect because of the factory defect on that tang, but yeah, we got her going. This is going to be a great knife. I can't wait to get the polishing compound cleaned off of it, put it in my pocket. Thank you.